Hello again, Biology 1620. Here's part 3 of the Biomes and Global Ecology lecture. We've been talking about biomes, and we've been talking about how when you change latitude, you change precipitation and temperature conditions, which changes vegetation. So for example, if you start in the mid-latitudes, you've got temperate forests, temperate climate, moderate climate, somewhat warm, somewhat wet. As you go north in latitude, or south in latitude, if we go south of the equator. Let's say we're going north, we get arboreal forests, so evergreens and conifers. Go even further north and you've got tundra until you finally get to the North Pole. So that's that latitude gradient that we've been talking about. And this figure is showing that you have a very similar effect when you also change in elevation. So you tend to get temperate forests at low and moderate elevation, and as you go up the mountains, you get coniferous forests, which you might call subalpine, then you get alpine tundra, and then finally you just get lots of snow and ice. And you guys know this because you live in Utah. So we have very different vegetation down in the valley than you have up in the mountains. And you can think about the effect of elevation on the vegetation in a very similar way that latitude has an effect on vegetation. So if you drive up Big Cottonwood Canyon, you'll notice that you get different plants in different parts of the canyon. And this is for exactly the same reasons as we've already been talking about, temperature and precipitation. So at the bottom of the canyon, you get things like Gamble oak and the famous Utah juniper. Oak is an angiosperm, and as you go north, you start to see only gymnosperms, only conifers, firs and spruces and pines. And that's because the gymnosperms are adapted to freezing conditions. So as we're going up the mountain, it's getting colder and colder and colder. You actually get more precipitation as you go up the mountain, which is also nice, but the extremely cold conditions are the reason why the gymnosperms are doing so well up there. And that is because of the same thing that we've already talked about before, which is the difference in xylem in gymnosperms and angiosperms. So if this were an in-person lecture, we would be using clickers to ask you to identify which one of these types of xylem is the one that's used by the trees at the top of Big Cottonwood Canyon. So I just told you that it's the gymnosperms that are at the top of the canyon. Those are the conifers, spruces, firs, and pines. And so you tell me which one of these is used in those trees. I won't give you the answer, but you can find it out for yourself very easily. Okay, actually I'm telling you right now, sorry, this is new. We're not really sure how we're doing clicker questions here. Yeah, we're making up as we go along here. So gymnosperm tracheids, so tracheids are the ones used by tracheids. I think you guys already know that. They are very resistant to freezing conditions because because the water is squeezed into these through these tiny holes and then these tiny tracheids, unlike the giant wide open vessels of angiosperms, which are very sensitive to freezing. You don't find angiosperms, certainly not angiosperms that transport lots of water and grow super quickly in freezing conditions, because the water in these wide open vessels would freeze, you'd get air bubbles, and the plant would die. Tracheids are designed to prevent that, to prevent the formation of bubbles, and if you do get an air bubble in here, then they just close off that part of the tracheid and life goes on. So in addition to the different strategies in water transport, the gymnosperm needles are adapted for these conditions. The needles are adapted to minimize loss of water, which is not so important at the top of a mountain because you do get lots of snow, but it's still a good idea. But the point here, in this particular case actually, is that they're evergreen. So we call them evergreen because they're always green, and they're always green because they don't really have very long summer seasons. And so if a gymnosperm is going to grow up to be a gigantic tree, as they do, then they need to be able to conduct photosynthesis even in bad weather. And so that's why they're always green, and they are the tortoise in the classic tortoise versus the hare scenario, where the gymnosperms are adapted to just constantly do a little bit of photosynthesis all the time with their tiny green needles instead of going super fast like a hare, whereas a hare might freeze to death in the winter, if I can continue that analogy. Okay, so both of these are adaptations for gymnosperms to live in these conditions. That's why you find them at the top of the mountain. So a little more about mountains and vegetation. I think you guys, if you've lived in Salt Lake City for at least a little bit, you know about the rain shadow, or not even Salt Lake City, but Utah in general, which is this concept that going from west to east, and mountain chains around here generally go north-south, so that they interrupt the prevailing winds from west to east. The Uinta Mountains are highly unusual in North America for going east-west instead of north-south. But anyway, let's think about the Wasatch, or the Rocky Mountains, going north-south, clouds going from west to east. This is showing from the Pacific Ocean, which is not quite exactly true in Utah. Like, there are a couple of mountain ranges in between us and the Pacific Ocean, but the concept still holds. You've got wet clouds going from west to east. They slam into a mountain, and they don't have anywhere to go except up. As the clouds are forced upward, due to the fact that they're slamming into a mountain, they cool down, and when they cool down, as they go up, they release water. In exactly the same way, or for a very similar reason, that the clouds drop rain at the equators when they are cooling off as that hot air rises, cools off, drops rain. That's why you get lots of rain in the equator, and that's also why you get lots of rain near the tops of mountains, because clouds drop rain as they are forced upward and cool off. So by the time the clouds make it all the way over to the other side of the mountains, they've rained out, they don't have any more moisture, they're very dry, and so you get this rain shadow such that the eastern sides of mountains are quite dry. And you can even get desert-like conditions not far from where you have lush green forests because the mountains are raining out the clouds. So another effect of elevation on biomes. So that was our use of our local environment to talk about biomes. Another local thing that we have around here is deserts. So as our introduction to deserts, you tell me where, how many of these things can explain the distribution of deserts that we see on this map. So you find deserts in all of the red locations on this map. Is that because all of these locations are near 30 degrees latitude? Is it because they're all on the leeward side of mountains? That means on the side of the direction in which the clouds are going over. So the thing I was just talking about, leeward side of mountains means the rain shadow. Are all these deserts caused by rain shadows? Are they there because they're in the interior of continents and very far from the ocean, and they're just dry because they're very far from the ocean? Is it because they're in regions of descending air? So air that is dry and coming down and then actually taking moisture away from the land? Is that why you find deserts in these locations? Or is it all of the above? And as you guys know, usually in a question like this, if all of the above is one of the options, there's a very good chance that it's the right answer. But of course, that's not always true, so don't quote me on that. And that's the case here. I will go ahead and give you the answer. You get deserts, you tend to get deserts around 30 degrees south and 30 degrees north, and you can see that on this map. You also get them on the leeward side of mountains, which is not quite obvious in this map, but you do see some deserts on the east side of the Rockies and the Wasatch here. You see some deserts on the east side of the Himalayas here. You do get deserts in the interior continents, like here and here, in the middle of Australia, because they're far from the ocean, and so the clouds rain out before they get there. And then regions of descending air, this is the same reason as the 30 degrees latitude, right? You get descending air at 30 degrees latitude, that's why you tend to find deserts there. Okay, so that was a review to deserts as well as an introduction to deserts. Now let's talk about the deserts that we have in our backyard. Some closer than others, but these are the 4 great deserts of North America. All of them are relatively close to where we are right now. And you may not know, and I didn't know until I moved here, that these four deserts are quite distinct in latitude, in precipitation, and temperature, and also in vegetation. And that's why they get four different names. So the Sonoran Desert, so that's here in our map. This is southwestern Arizona. Looks somewhat like this. You've got some pretty decent sized mountains, but not gigantic mountains. You've got giant cacti. You've got cactus all over the place, in fact, and the Sonoran Desert is famous for that. And the reason why the cactus are here, actually, is because the Sonoran Desert actually get lots of water. There's rain in the winter, and it also has summer monsoons. So the reason why there are cacti here, and certainly why there are giant water-filled stems in these cacti, is because there's actually lots of water. So if you see giant cactus, you should think water. Even though the cactus is kind of the iconic feature of deserts as we commonly think of them in American popular culture, a cactus actually means that there's a fair amount of water. And in fact, the Sonoran Desert gets water in both the winter and the summer. And if you contrast this to the Chihuahuan Desert, for example, which is in Mexico and a little bit of New Mexico and Texas, you do not see any cacti because it has far less water. So the Chihuahuan Desert has summer rain, but it doesn't get any rain during the winter. And so it has very dry winters, and there's not enough water to have giant water-filled cacti. Instead, you get this scrubby stuff with tiny leaves to conserve water. They never get very big. You don't see any big vegetation here at all. And it's just kind of like a flat brushland. If we go north to the Mojave Desert, so we started with the Sonoran Desert and then we went south to the Chihuahuan Desert where it's drier in the winter. And then if we go north from the Sonoran Desert to the Mojave Desert, then we only have rain in the winter. So here it's too far north to have any of the summer monsoons that Arizona gets. But it is far enough north and cold enough that you do get a little bit of rain in the winter. So this is exactly the opposite of the Chihuahuan Desert, only gets rain in the summer. The Mojave Desert only gets rain in the winter, and you can see that the plants are different. Even if you don't really know much about plant identification, like me, actually, you can still tell that these plants are different from each other, right? You have these leaves with large pointy blades. You've got some other plants that with leaves that don't look very cuddly, they're kind of like prickly. And you've also got these big bare patches and lots of bare rock, which is characteristic of the Mojave. If you go even further north to the Great Basin Desert, which is very close to us, takes up much of Nevada and western central Utah, then it looks fairly similar to the Mojave Desert, actually. You've got these brush-like things, and it's even further north from the Mojave, of course, right? We're moving even further north, so that in addition to winter rain, we also get winter snow. So it's pretty similar to the Mojave in that it only gets moisture in the winter, but in the Great Basin, you also get winter snow, and you also get runoff from these lovely mountains with tons of snow. And the vegetation, again, scrubby things with not very friendly looking leaves and lots of bare patches. And again, no cacti. All right, those are the four great American deserts. You should know the differences between them, especially in terms of their latitude and their precipitation. If we had more time, we would go more into the actual plants that live there, but got to move right along in this course all the time. And so now, just as a review, I'll leave these as quiz questions for you. The answers are on previous slides, so it's not that hard, but for your own good, you should review using these slides. Where do you find tropical rainforests? Where do you find deserts? Where do you find deciduous forests? And again, the point here is latitude. You don't have to pinpoint exactly where these different biomes are. The point is for you to recognize that different latitudes have different biomes. I think that we've driven that point home far enough. I think you get the idea. And that is the end of part 3. The fourth and final part is coming up next.